I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. This week, I'm speaking with Brian about a Borges story about a friendship with a terrible poet. So we talk about that. We talk about friendships with writers and friendships with terrible writers, and then those strange moments when somebody you dislike and do not respect makes something beautiful. It's a great story. It's called The Aleph, and we have a lot of fun talking about it. There's a Secret Show episode that is even bigger than this one and a little bit more sprawling, but I think maybe of interest to you all. So go check that out at sleerickets.substack.com. Also, thank you to everyone who sent in poems for whatever I'm going to call this on mic, not workshop, but critique or deepen style. It won't be a roasting, I promise. I'm going to go through some of them. It's too many for me to go through all of them, but I will be putting that together soon, and we'll see how it goes. And I hope to do more of those in the future. I am going to give some priority to the Secret Show subscribers. All right, and with that, here is my conversation with Brian about Jorge Luis Borges's The Aleph. It was funny because I heard a little while ago a conversation between like two academics about The Aleph, and which I had not read at the time. And my recollection, at least this may be inaccurate, my recollection is that their whole conversation was about like the philosophical properties of an Aleph.
That's funny.
And then I read this story, and it's totally not that.
This story is a riot. Borges is a riot. I guess like so many of us, I went through a Borges phase that probably followed a Kafka phase. For some reason, those two
and the problem is my Borges phase started in college and never ended.
Is that true?
Yeah.
It's just such a delight. I haven't read a story by Borges in years, and just like picking up this, it's all here. It's all so like borderline dopey. I know. Do you not agree? Is that
but this one is also like this one is so much more. This is so much more of an Eggers story than he normally writes. Like it's so much more self-reflexive. Yeah. He is in the story. He's very sort of like he's an embarrassing figure in the story.
He's embarrassing. There's this big bait and switch that you think the story is about his love for this like sad, big-handed, grotesque, beautiful woman who dies, right? But it's
who like pitied him, and
exactly who he's every day. He like all he wants is to now like be around her relatives after her death, and her relatives are humoring her. It's like such a switch from what you think the book is going. I mean, the story is going to be about. That it's so charming from beginning to end.
Yeah, so this woman dies, and there's like I actually think like the first sentence is I find sort of like it's again like it's all embarrassing, but it's sort of touching in its embarrassment. On the burning February morning,
which by the way, stop, like the burning February morning is like almost so dumb, I mean,
it's South America.
I
right?
know it is.
Yeah.
I know it is. But just you come to it, and you anyway.
Yeah, it's like the first line of 1984. The clocks were striking 13.
Exactly.
On the burning February, because he was very oriented to Europe and America and was aware of how that would read. On the burning February morning, Beatrice Viterbo died after braving an agony that never for a single moment gave way to self-pity or fear. Sort of like already like grandiose terms. I noticed that the sidewalk billboards around Constitution Plaza were advertising some new brand or other of American cigarettes. He goes on, the fact pained me, for I realized that the wide and ceaseless universe was already slipping away from her. It's super over the top, and it's like a childish recognition, but it's also really totally relate to that. I totally recognize that moment. Like, no, all of you should also be mourning Beatrice Viterbo and her big hands.
How strategic do you think the over-the-top tone is? 100% strategic? Like, do you think
I think in this story,
100% aware of that what he's doing here is writing in a voice that is dopey?
Oh, but I think in this story, it's got to be 100% because like his antagonist in this story is a bad over the top poet who's very like self-confident and like they have mutual disdain for each other, but they both keep, and like there are some really like some moments I missed the first time through, which are some of my favorite, are the moments when the fraudulent, bombastic, untalented poetaster character like cuts him to the core with some observation,
Yeah.
like completely eats Borges's lunch, where he's trying to wheedle a recommendation for a preface out of him by saying like, hey, you're a writer in this writerly world and you know this guy Alvaro Melian Lafeneur, and like he would, if he wrote a preface to my poem, that would really mean a lot. And then just the end of this long paragraph of puffing up, he says he added that Beatrice had always been taken with Alvaro, which is just
Yeah.
like,
Yep.
because Borges is obsessed with Beatrice and he knows this, and then later there's like a terrible moment, which I think Borges seems like the Borges in the story seems not to recognize what has happened, but it's like the most agonizingly embarrassing moment in the story when he's left alone in like the parlor with a portrait of Beatrice while his host is being summoned. On the unplayed piano beside a large vase that held no flowers, smiled, more timeless than belonging to the past, the large photograph of Beatrice in gaudy colors. Nobody could see us. In a seizure of tenderness, I drew close to the portrait and said to it, Beatrice, Beatrice Elena Viterbo, darling Beatrice, Beatrice now gone forever. It's me, it's Borges. Moments later, Carlos came in. But after that, Carlos throws in, he's inviting him to see this insane thing, which is an Aleph, which is the big weird bait and switch. But he says, of course, if you don't see it, your incapacity will not invalidate what I have experienced. Now down you go. In a short while, you can babble with all of Beatrice
Yeah.
images. He overheard him. He came in a few moments later, but he overheard the whole embarrassing, blubbering thing. I mean, I think all of the sentimentality and grandiosity in the story and all of the like writerly snipiness at each, I think it's all totally self-conscious. Um,
I agree, and I was hoping you would feel that way because that makes this all the more delightful. Do you mind summarizing the plot for our
yeah,
listeners?
such as it is. So Beatrice Viterbo dies. He is heartbroken. She he even, I mean, from the very beginning, he says, I knew at times that my fruitless devotion had annoyed her. He was in love with this woman who barely tolerated him. And so on the anniversary of her birthday, which is several months after her death, he decides that he says it's an irreproachable opportunity to go to her house to pay his respects. He wants an excuse. I mean, to me, it reminds me of like all of the women I have known who have cringed at the lingering hugs of people at like weird old men, like,
Yeah.
well, we're saying goodbye, so we better hug each other. And now I can lingeringly lean into your hair while I hug you. Like that's what this whole story feels like from Borges. He's leaning into the hair of this dead woman to smell her house and her portraits. And so he bothers her father and her first cousin who live there. The first cousin is the poetaster. And then he makes a tradition of it, a horrible tradition, where every year on her birthday, he goes back and he lingers a little later and he kind of finally like finagles his way into coming for dinner.
Well, because he gets most excited in 1933 because a torrential downpour came to his
Yeah.
aid, which meant they were obliged to ask me for dinner,
And
which
then he
is
sort of
he
he
knows how,
arranges,
right,
yeah.
from once they ask him for dinner one year, they
It's
must
a
ask
it's a
him all the
precedent.
following
Yeah.
years.
And then he brings treats. He brings like
Yeah,
some dessert. Well, I brought
and some
dessert for the
cognac.
dinner to which you will
Exactly.
inevitably have to invite
Some
me.
cognac.
So
Yep.
he keeps imposing himself on this family, and there's a kind of a like it again, like so much of it just rings so true socially because it's this like mutually contemptuous parasitism where Borges is there to bask in Beatrice's shadow or ghost, and then Carlos, the poetaster cousin, who we later learn like seemingly was maybe had some kind of sexual involvement with Beatrice. Like Carlos was maybe like we hear about these obscene letters that they exchanged that
Yes. The word obscene. Yes.
something
I
between,
think
yeah.
it hints
And it
in that
also like it
direction.
just feels like the rivalry and the hatred between these men that has to be there on some level.
All right, keep on get through the plot because we
Yeah,
have a
okay,
lot to
okay.
yeah.
So he he spends all of these visits. boasting to Borges about all of his opinions and his sort of phony. His mental activity was continuous, deeply felt, far-ranging, and all in all meaningless. And then finally, we learn that he's a poet as well, and he starts quoting these poems that he's written to Borges, and then at great length explicating how brilliant they are. And
Yes.
Borges tolerates all this sort of, to some extent, in an amused way, but with total disdain. After several rounds of this, he requests that this preface from Borges's friend. Borges, to me, the paragraph that felt like pure Brian was: turning the corner of Bernardo de Irigoyen, I reviewed as impartially as possible the alternatives before me. They were A, to speak to Alvaro, telling him the
It's
first
so
cousin of
good. So
Beatrice, the
good. Yep.
explanatory euphemism would allow me to mention her name, had concocted a poem that seemed to draw out into infinity the possibilities of cacophony and chaos. B, not to say a word to Alvaro. I clearly foresaw that my indolence would opt for B. So he doesn't follow up, but then finally Carlos calls him up and says, "Hey, they're going to demolish my home. They're expanding the cafe next door and they're going to tear down my home. This is a disaster. I need my home. I can't complete my home without the Aleph." And
It's
Borges says,
also
like,
so funny because there's no explanation for like why the cafe owns the rights to his home. Like
like
there's just
how
like
is the
none of this
cafe
makes
able
any
to?
sense. Like the cafe, which we see earlier, is like a fucking horrible, like shitty
Yeah,
cafe. The guy
it's
calls up Borges for no real reason. It's not like Borges is an expert on like land rights, right? So he calls up Borges and he's like, "Oh no, the cafe is so successful, it's going to take over my home."
right. Which is, I mean, to me, the way I read that was like, it's on some level, I thought that because he was so proud of the cafe when he introduced Borges to it, that in my mind I thought like he had like, in with using all of his bad poetaster judgment, he had like signed away his deed to the cafe by investing in it somehow or something like this. Like,
Right.
but somehow Borges is like, it's this thing where like the this person that you hate, that you become obsessed with hating, ends up being like the primary witness to your whole life, and you're like dependent on him years later. So he Borges is the right person to ask, because of course he's fascinated. But he says, like, an Aleph. What do you mean? There's an Aleph in the basement. You need the Aleph to complete the poem. And he tells this story that's like just wonderful, like straight faced story. He says, "Oh, I discovered it when I was a child all by myself." It's a great addition, all by myself. "The cellar stairway is so deep that my aunt and uncle forbade me using it, but I'd heard someone say there was a world down there. I found out later they meant an old fashioned globe of the world, but at the time I thought they were referring to the world itself. One day when no one was home, I started down in secret, but I stumbled and fell. When I opened my eyes, I saw the Aleph." And the
Right.
Aleph
So
is
yeah.
a place where all places are. You can see every single place in the entire universe in one little point. And Borges gives a more detailed, description of it later. But
Let me just interrupt to
yeah,
emphasize the joke that someone says there's a world down
right.
there
And
because
it's
there
just,
really is the entire world you can
yeah,
see through this Aleph, all moments at all places at all times. But also there's a globe, which is just like a stupid facsimile of the world. So like someone's like, there's a whole world down there. I realized he was just referring to a globe, but also there was the whole world down there. It's like Borges just, he won't leave it alone. Like everything needs to be twisted and tinkered with.
it also like all of the names that start with Z in the story.
Yeah, it's so
every name starts
stupid.
with Z. But so Borges says, like, "Oh, I must come over and see it. I'm so excited." And he says, "It amazed me." I love the it amazed me also felt like a Brian moment. "It amazed me not to have suspected until that moment that Carlos Argentino was a madman."
Yep.
And so he comes over like
And
very,
the
very,
narrator is so
yeah.
excited
Oh,
to
he's so
have
happy.
proof that
He
this
hates this
terrible
guy so much. He's
poet
like, "Oh,
is a
oh,
lunatic.
how
Yeah.
delicious. He's actually insane." And then he tells him, like, "Oh, okay, all right. You want to see the Aleph?" And then very like in very kind of matter of fact, like clinical fashion, he's like, "Okay, first you have to have some pseudo cognac, and then you have to lie down in the dark on the ground in the basement and lie on this half-inch tall pillow and close your eyes and let your eyes adjust, and then look up at the 19th step above you,
Which
and
is
then
all
you'll see it."
something a madman would
Oh,
say.
totally insane, totally insane. And then Borges has like a cask of Amontillado moment where he says, like, "For the first time I realized the danger I was in. I'd let myself be locked in a cellar by a lunatic." And then I felt a shock of panic, which I tried to pin to my uncomfortable position and not to the effect of a drug. I shut my eyes, I opened them, then I saw the Aleph. And so the bait and switch is like, oh, actually, it's true.
Yes.
It is really there.
Yes.
And he describes, I think sort of like vividly this experience of watching this Aleph. The beginning of his description, though, is, and here begins my despair as a writer, because he knows he can't convey what it is that he's seen to the reader, but all he's good for is conveying things to the reader. And of course, he knows that he's doomed to fail. There is a nice another little Dave Eggers moment where he says, in listing all the millions of things he saw, I saw the Aleph from every point and angle, and in the Aleph I saw the earth, and in the earth the Aleph, and in the Aleph the earth. I saw my own face and my own bowels. I saw your face. Little second person moment.
Yeah.
And then I think like the brilliant Borgesian sadistic turn is when Carlos Argentino sort of contemptuously, rouses him and says, well, you've been, I know what you've seen. Your mind
I defeated you. Yeah.
Yeah, your mind's been blown. And he says, what is it? One hell of an observatory, eh, Borges? And Borges respond, I managed to pick myself up and utter, one hell of a yes, one hell of the matter-of-factness of my voice surprised me. Anxiously, Carlos Argentino went on. Like as an accident, he couldn't get his thoughts out, and so he accidentally sounds more nonchalant than he is. But then Carlos responds to that. Did you see everything really clear in colors? At that moment, I found my revenge. Kindly, openly pitying him, distraught, evasive, I thanked Carlos Argentino Denari for the hospitality of a cellar and urged him to make the most of the demolition to get away from the pernicious metropolis, which spares no one. Believe me, I told him no one. He pretends not to have seen it.
Yeah,
That's
in
his
order
revenge.
to fuck with them. Yeah.
Oh
So
yeah.
they're one-upping each other
Yeah.
at the
Their
end,
whole
which
lives.
comes as, so these one-ups are effective because the reader doesn't expect them either. So they perform two roles. They're
Yeah.
like, in the story itself, Borges goes over to see this Aleph to prove that his enemy is a lunatic, but then the enemy one-ups Borges because it's actually there. So then
Yeah.
Borges, to get his revenge, pretends it's not there. And all of these moves aren't only effective parries and stabs, but also reverse the reader's experience and upend our expectation.
Yes, and we should clarify that the Aleph is not just it's not just any miracle, because the poem, the guy is writing a monster, massive, mega epic. He says Michael Drayton's Polyolbion, which is a 15,000 line description of the English landscape, which the Wikipedia entry for,
I know, I had never heard of it. I looked at it.
It's like a very short 4 paragraph Wikipedia entry. One of the few descriptions of it is most often not read. Like scholars don't bother to read it; they just cite it as being historically significant because it's unreadable. And Borges says, like, I've only once read it, and boy, I can promise you that it is far less boring than Carlos Argentino's poem. But the Carlos's poem is a description of the entire Earth. That it is a thing deliverable through, like, he's right that he needs the Aleph to do it, because it is actually a transcription of all of this stuff that he's seen in the Aleph. And so one way of reading this is like, if the worst writer you'd ever met told you, like, oh, the muse Calliope lives in my basement.
Yes.
And she's
Yes.
dictating a brilliant book to me. And you're like, well, and then you went down there and she was there.
Right.
Like,
and especially if that guy might have been sleeping with the love of your life.
Right. Oh, and that's in the Aleph. He sees, it's interesting. He doesn't see the past, but he sees the love letters they exchanged, which were really dirty.
Right.
So there's a postscript to the story, which feels sort of like, again, like the philosophers who talked about this talked only about the second part of the postscript, where like the real Aleph is. The biggest impact of the postscript is that Carlos Argentino Denari publishes a portion of his poem and wins a big prize for it.
Weirdly, not first place.
Not first prize.
He wins second
place. But he wins second place in a contest in which Borges himself also had a book and didn't receive a single vote.
Single vote.
So he is, you know, out, and now it's been some time now that I've been trying to see Denary. The gossip is that a second selection of the poem is about to be published. So he's been trumped by his poetaster rival, and he's trying, like, he's now trying to catch back up with this guy who used to beg him to get his friends to endorse his book. And then the end is this meditation on how he's now got a thesis that, well, okay, I know I saw this unbelievable miracle that changed my life forever, and nothing else can ever compare, and I could never convey to anybody what it was like. But I think that that was a false Aleph. Somewhere there's got to actually be a real one. And maybe it's a real one that nobody else can access. But like, truly, this wasn't it. This was still not real. This was no, to me, this is where, like, the part of the story that reads most like he's trying to comfort, he's trying to, like, nurse his wounds.
Yes, I think that's right, although I don't fully understand it. I'd like to sort of gloss the story very, very quickly structurally, and then I
Yeah.
want to hear your take on what Borges is getting at.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you have this very unreliable, unlikable narrator who gives us a series of characterizations of this other person, in so doing, making the other person even more unlikable and unbearable than the narrator. Right. So first we have him talk about how we have this other character, Carlos, who's the villain of this story, maybe the hero at the end, but he seems like he's going to be the villain. He talks about how he views humans today in their inner sanctum, supplied with telephones and telegraphs and phonographs. So it's like he's like a blowhard talking about how people today are too distractible by technology. And that's
Right.
like really unbearable. Then we read a stanza of the poem, and it's a really bad poem. So that like makes this guy even more unbearable. And then we hear the guy talk about how smart and fantastic his own poem is, which is like the third
Yeah.
moment where the guy is super unbearable. Then we have him edit the poem so everything that's blue now is called azure, and everything that's milky is called lacteal or lactescent, which is just like awful for obvious reasons. And that's the fourth unbearable thing about this guy. And then the fifth is that he's asking favors of a writer to get another writer to do him favors. So he's like objectively horrible. So we have a narrator who's annoying, describing an objectively horrible person to us. But it turns out that the objectively horrible person not only is in possession of the most valuable thing ever to exist in the history of the world, but is also then celebrated as a one of the best writers of his
Yeah.
time. So what is this story about? It's about how writers hate each other. Is that what it
uh,
is?
I think like in the conversation we had, as well as in her essays on the subject, Naomi Kanakia makes some good points about how it's sort of fruitless to try to teach people to look for deeper meanings in stories. I do tend to think that's quite
I think that's
right.
true, except I think that Borges is an exception to that. So I think that if somebody were looking for deeper meanings and saying, what is my novel really about?
Right.
I would say it's not about anything. If I wanted to be about something, I would write an op-ed. Instead, I'm writing a novel, which is your opportunity to be entertained with insight into the human condition or something like that. But
Right. So
this this is slightly different from that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, well, so Borges also, like, loved codes and puzzles and riddles and layers and reference. I mean, he ate that stuff up and breathed it in and out and did it even without trying at a certain point. So that's certainly true. Like, there are a million little jokes, and like the truncated version of the poem is published by Procrustes and Co. Like, there are all these little jokes inside it, of
Right.
course. But beyond that, I think, like, my larger response to Naomi's challenge is that, for me, the deeper meaning that matters in a piece of literature is not what's encoded there that you can come up with proof
Of course.
for if you do an explication, nor is it even necessarily what the author was intending as a secret meaning. it's that there are times when you read a story about one thing and you get a very strong feeling of emotional recognition of a
Absolutely.
kind of arrangement, a kind of experience that even if you're not reading about that experience, boy, it really reminds you of it. And so even though we're talking about an impossible object in a guy's basement who's obviously crazy, the feeling that it evokes is a feeling that I recognize from, again, like I do think that it's something, like there is something strange about being friends with writers if you're a writer, both
Yeah.
because
So I
yeah,
retract my
sorry.
question. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
what is this actually about? It's why are we talking about it? Right. That's the question I mean to be
Okay,
asking.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think the answer to that, what you're getting to at, is the story is about, which isn't the right
Sure. Yeah, yeah,
phrase.
yeah.
The reason why we're talking about it is because it is a depiction of two writers who pretend to be friends with each other, but actually loathe each other and are both pathetic
Yes.
failures and can't let each other go.
Yes, and so I think like again, I like to run counterfactuals. Like there's a version of the story, like as with like the heartbreaking work that has no Christopher in it, the version of the story that has no Beatrice in it is unbearable. Like
Right, because
Beatrice
it
is
just
just
becomes a
this love
spy versus
object.
spy,
Then
right?
it's just two shitty writers who hate each
Right.
other. And there's like, even if his love for Beatrice is sort of like pitiful and contemptible, even it is, he has a beating heart. And I think similarly, the other thing, and what also feels very true to the experience of being friends with writers or like frenemies with writers or social with writers is like you see these people, you hate them, you're jealous of them, you date the same people, you have all these different rivalries and you get drinks with them and you kind of can enjoy, like there are many occasions when I have had like an enjoyable evening of drinks with somebody I generally loathe, right,
Yeah.
as a writer and as a person,
Yeah.
but you can get along because at a certain level you understand each other better than the rest of the world does. But what's also true is that every so often, occasionally, something pure and magical and almost divine is in the room. And you're part of, like, you're in contact with it. Like
Yeah.
somebody you know who's a piece of shit writes something amazing. Or like you read, even like reading something great in the company of somebody,
Yeah.
it can elevate the whole experience. And it's sort of unaccountable and you can't put it in a bottle and you can't preserve it, you can't predict it, but it is also still there. And that's the reason you keep circling back around all of these horrible people we know who are all writers.
I have stopped spending time with writers. I have. I don't
Well, yeah, probably
I'm
wise.
trying to think. You're the writer I speak to most often. I'm trying to think who the right like
You don't know any other writers in New York City or Brooklyn? You know?
no. I don't. The human beings with whom I interact have that number has
Right. Yeah. You don't. Yeah.
dwindled down as I repeat to everybody all the time. The combination of a neurological disorder and two kids for whom I'm the primary caretaker means that like I interact with my students and other teachers,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's interesting. There was a time in my life, grad school, most obviously, but the years before and after grad school, where many, if not most of the people I interacted with were had the same goals and aims, and I felt
Yeah.
in
Yeah. Yeah.
competition with them, and we were all reading things and talking about things, and there was a dynamism there that I miss now. I I
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I miss hating some of our classmates who were awful writers and bad people, but who cared about reading and writing as much as I did. Where I wouldn't
Yeah.
have
Yeah. Yeah.
hated them if they were bankers or electricians, right? Like the only reason why I bothered hating the one or two people I can whose names are in your mind,
Right. Yeah.
whom I
Yeah.
is because they spent probably didn't spend as much time, but because their conception of self was
Yeah. Yeah.
as linked to being a writer as mine was.
Yeah.
And I kind of think it's healthier that I've
Oh,
run
it's
run
definitely
away from
healthier.
that world.
And
But
and I'm
you
realizing now like what is totally like
but I don't go to AWP and I don't interact with other
yeah,
writers and I
yeah.
don't meet up with them at bars. I don't host a podcast. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
you have maybe it's because you're married to a writer.
I was going to say, being married to a writer is like, do you have one recessive Tay-Sachs gene, or do you have full blown Tay?
Right.
If you're two writers being married to each other, you have you have whatever the pathology is.
Right. And just like I probably still in touch with people from my undergraduate experience because I'm married to somebody from undergraduate, like somebody from
Oh yeah, yeah,
college.
yeah, yeah.
Like there is something
Like
similar with
Columbia
like
people will be more part of your life because of that.
exactly
Yeah.
because otherwise I wouldn't be interacting with many people who I would. So there is something to that. But you seem to be trying to maintain literary relationships.
Mm, I mean, I
You
had the problem is like I have strong literary relationships.
but you've developed even more after graduate school. I haven't.
Yeah,
Even though I immediately left graduate school and have lived in Brooklyn and
I
been
think if
publishing
I so before I came to
steadily.
graduate school, I was already very close with Ryan.
Right,
Like, and so, but what I
right.
mean is like that he was like a very big part of my life, and then in graduate school I compounded that by marrying a writer.
Yeah,
So
it's fair.
I think like just even if nothing else, even if I had just continued to
Yeah.
know the two of them the way I do, I think it would be difficult for me to get. I mean, even because like the only reason I started doing anything at Literary Matters was because
I was
Ryan
gonna
put it in my
say, and then
arm,
because
you
of
know?
Ryan, you fell into another world of
Yeah.
writers,
Like
and then
I wouldn't go to AWP except it's in LA. So Joanna wanted both of us to go this year because usually she just goes.
right. So I would say that there is real value in one's formative years
Yeah.
in these relationships. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
hanging
Yeah.
out with a couple friends who were as obsessed with this stuff as undergrads as I was,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
made me delve deeper and care more and think more. I think in graduate school, hanging out with you and Angel Palmer and John Carrillo and some of the others made me a better thinker and writer. What do you think about maintaining these relationships into a time in one's life when one gets to see the successes or failures of one's cohort?
Yeah.
Because that's the big difference to me. I've stopped making writer friends at
Right.
before the age where people were succeeding or failing at
Yeah.
very, I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
everybody
Yeah.
fails eventually,
Right.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
succeeding and then failing at different levels.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, so and a few things, are there are a few differences. One is that is poetry versus fiction, right? Like it's like when we were in grad school and people were trying to get published. It's like if you publish one short story at a real
Oh,
magazine, that's a
yeah,
huge fucking
yes,
deal. You
yes.
publish like 10 poems at decent magazines, and that's fine, but it's like it's a whole different scale with fiction. And so if you know a couple of fiction writers who are successful novelists, like again, like what's a successful poet? Like I know a variety of poets who have a variety of degrees of success, and it's a lot mushier and smaller. But
Yeah.
beyond that, I have like a few thoughts. One is that I think on balance, it's probably worse for you to know writers closely as an adult, even more so, like, period, but even more so if you are a writer. Like, knowing, I think writers in general are not great people to know. And if you are a writer, it's worse than not knowing them.
I am a totally adequate person to know. What are
No,
you
you're a
talking?
wonderful person to
Writers in
know. I love many of
general
the
are
writers in my
bad
life.
people to know.
But again, you are giving yourself, like, you are evaluating yourself according to your charming voice and excessive use of adjectives, and I'm evaluating you according to the fraternal love story at the heart of you, right? But no, I think like I love a lot of writers, so I think on the one hand
You
it
mean like
is
I present as like a one version that's like a delight to know, but at my heart, like at my core, I'm like an empty, broken, fetid vessel of
no, I mean the
misery.
opposite of that. I mean you're a miserable bore in person, but then secretly you're a really nice guy. No, I mean so I think like on the one hand, like probably it is not really very good for you to be friends with a lot of writers if you are a writer. Even if you're not a writer, why would you be friends with a lot of writers? They're not real. Go be friends with real people instead. But I also think there is a luxury to our cynicism about writers, and I think like talking to some of the people I teach at this little it's not a proper school, it's a company that's like like a tutoring company or a music school.
It puts
uh
courses together.
yeah, they put courses together for adults who want to take writing courses, and And in the course of that, I meet a lot of people who loved writing when they were in college and have not done it since, but kind of want to get back to it. And one of the things I see, I mean, there are a lot, I mean, people with a lot of different experiences, but like a fairly consistent type of response I see is people who are thoughtful people. They love to read. They are in jobs that are, challenging jobs, sometimes intellectually challenging jobs. They're smart people, they're accomplished people, but they don't, when they are in a room with the other students and with me, and I've picked out some good short stories to read, and we're talking about them, and we're even talking about how their own stories succeed and fail, they get access to something that they really value.
Yeah.
And it's not something they get access to otherwise. And so I'm extremely cynical about being around writers and what we do to each other. But I also think like, the Aleph is also real. And there is
Yeah,
like,
but
it is
you're
a
not
wonderful
talking
thing at
about
times to.
writers. You're not talking about writers when you talk about your students. You're talking about people who are trying to
Oh, no,
write.
no, 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 no. I'm actually being more insufferable than you think, even. I'm referring to myself as the person who's worth knowing in that case. That I think there is something that like I realize I offer them that
I see.
it would be cynical of me to dismiss the thing that they apparently get from that. And I don't think I like maybe that's really maybe what I'm actually praising is it being a teacher, but I do think that like there's a way I'm
No,
approaching the stuff
teachers are
that is a bit.
great.
Teachers are
I
wonderful, but teachers are saints, writers are vampires. But I think that there's a at least as I approach it, and
Teachers
I
are
think
not saints, by the way.
no, they're
Teachers
not.
are
But
kings of their own little
no,
realms who
our
exercise authority over nobody for no reason.
like
But carry on.
in every piece of fiction, like the horrible tyrant in his previous life was a teacher.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
yeah, no, I mean that's yeah. The teachers are our public school system only works if all teachers are saints, which of course they are not. But some of them are. But no, I think like there is something exciting and maybe even valuable beyond the excitement to encountering somebody who takes really seriously this thing and really tries at it hard and has some knowledge about it and is invested in it and is in the like not just hey I read this book and it's worth reading, here's this book to read, but like I'm also going home every night and trying to do this. And
And that
I observe that
validates.
that seems to actually be a thing they value, and I don't want to dismiss their finding
Yes, but is
value
that
in it.
something that you value when interacting with a fellow human being? That human being also spends hours of their life inventing stories with words and trying to entertain people.
Yeah, I think I do value it, but I also think I am glutted on it, so I don't
Yeah.
value it as much as I would if I were in a desert.
Talking about counterfactuals,
Yeah,
why does the Aleph need to be in this story? I entirely agree with you that Beatrice needs to be in this
yeah,
story.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But why does the Aleph need to be in this
I think if
story?
the Aleph is not in the story, then it's just fraudulent, right? It's like writers are like it's about they may be sympathetic writers who are assholes and frauds, but they're just frauds. Whereas here,
But why
like
can't it be that this unbearable, entitled piece of shit, self important guy is a genius?
well, but I think that's what the Aleph is, right?
Right. But why does it need to be? Why does creating an item and creating an externality to it, manifesting that genius in physical form, why does that make the story able to exist in a way that if you just cut out the visit to the house and then you have a postscript saying, like if they just meet at a bakery and they have a falling out,
Yeah,
and then they have a postscript saying, oh, and then this guy became the most famous writer in Argentina,
right. But I
wouldn't
think then
what's the difference?
then we purely have a cynical reading of it, which is purely like
Right.
people are successful. It's all bullshit. Here, I think like there's like an
All right, but then
infinite.
what if instead of that you have a you know that moment in the movable it's the movable feast, a movable
A
feast, I
movable
think,
feast. Yeah.
where Hemingway has the interaction with Fitzgerald, and Fitzgerald is this like ridiculous, absurd
Yeah. Yeah.
character who
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
thinks he's sick, and he puts the thermometer under his armpit or something, and he gets drunk and he gets sober and he's terrible. And then that story ends with like, and then I read Great Gatsby,
Right.
and it
Yeah. Yeah.
was and it's the best thing I've ever
Right.
read, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
and it changes everything that comes before it in an
Yeah.
incredibly effective way. Why do we need an Aleph there as opposed to a moment where the narrator says, and then I read the poem and I stopped writing because it was better than anything I could ever hope to read. Right.
Yeah, I think there's a version of that that you could do. I think it's always a little bit risky. Hemingway's advantage when he does that is that The Great Gatsby is a real book and it actually is the best thing you've ever read, right? And so he just has to say like
Okay, so you're
that
saying The
thing.
Great Gatsby is the Aleph. Like you
He
do
can
sort
just
of
cite
need
it
the
and like
magical item. Right, right.
we it's a thing and like probably if we are the kind of people who bother to read A Movable Feast, we've already read it, and so we can
Of
actually just
course.
refer to our own memory of it and
Of
remember like
course.
holy shit, like
Right.
that's the
This
only
this
needle
piece
drop
of
you
shit
need,
drunk asshole
right?
had been writing The Great Gatsby the whole time.
Yeah, so like everything else doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah, so I think like one version of doing that would be if he said, now let me try to describe to you how good this writing is, and that would be a little bit hard to do. Or he could give you a
Yes.
sample of the writing,
But
but
then
he's
he would
already
have
been
to
giving
write,
you all these
yeah.
samples of this writing. And the thing is, like in the end, I'm not even convinced that the guy is a good poet.
No,
I
no, of
think that
course
he
not.
no, I think that
But
he just is exposed to this pure, amazing thing. I also think there's just like part of it is like where Borges' interest lies, and he is like a sci-fi nerd, and I also think there's just like such an exquisite distance in it's like the reverse of bathos, like from the ridiculous to the sublime between hey, when I was a kid, I misunderstood some adults and then bonked my head and I saw something. And you're like, that's the
right.
stupidest shit I've ever heard in my life versus, oh my God, I'm seeing the face of the divine,
Yeah.
right? Like the distance between
Yeah.
those two impressions is so vast that I think it probably outstrips anything else you could set up in its place.
And then your reading of his refusal to believe that the Aleph was the real Aleph,
Yeah, yeah.
you read that as a way that Borges is having the reader understand that the reality in which the narrator lives is just too painful, that this real thing exists. It didn't do anything for Borges, the character. It did do something for Borges's nemesis, and now it's all over. He has to live in a world where it wasn't real.
I think he has to live in a world where it's still out there to be found, right? And maybe it's easier for him if it's sort of like you take an almost like heroically Borgesian path to get there through all these like obscure references and all of these citations, and then it's actually it's in a single pillar of a stone temple in Cairo, but actually that pillar was extracted from an earlier temple before Islam and all these things. So yeah, I mean, I think in any Borges story, no one thing means only one version of itself. But yeah, I think what I read here is the emotional truth of this moment is like it can't have been Calliope. It can't really have been
Right.
her. It's got to, like she's really still got to be out there. And maybe the things I've been doing, my own weird little puzzle stories, surely that's the
Right.
way really to get to her someday. I'll find her. And of
Right.
course, the end of
It's a
the
way of
story
saying that the
is he's
story isn't over, right? It's not that the Aleph is gone and I have lost and he has won. It's that there's still a reason to get up in the morning.
well, I think it's yeah, he's got to keep being a writer. I mean, that's the thing is like if you're a friend of yours not only is like write something that's really successful, but actually is a genius, and you're sort of like envious and heartbroken and whatever, like then you still have to wake up and like you've already made yourself a writer. What are you going to do? You have to keep being a writer now, and I think
Yeah.
that's part of it. And of course, the very end of the story is our minds are porous and forgetfulness seeps in. I myself am distorting and losing under the wearing away of the years the face of Beatrice. And of course, it's not, it's no coincidence that it's, the
Beatrice,
same
of
name
course.
as, yeah, Dante's Beatrice. That was my conversation with Brian. You can hear us talk about a 25th anniversary reconsideration of a heartbreaking work of staggering genius, but really mostly about what makes for innovation in fiction, as well as who gets published in the extremely fucked up and slowly sinking publishing world on The Secret Show at sleerickets.substack.com. And as always, if you have trouble, if you have legitimate trouble paying for it, then please do write to me and I will work something out with you. Otherwise, it is very cheap. And if you are inclined to, if you have some free money, I'm so bad at this. If you have some expendable income and you would like to support the show or support other listeners to The Secret Show, then become a motherfucker of the arts. Otherwise, the show is very good and very cheap at SLEERICKETS.substack.com. Go check it out now. Thank you for listening. You can reach me, as always, at SLEERICKETS@gmail.com, and with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.